Good morning, or almost good afternoon. My name is Munib Madni. I lead the team at Panarchy Partners. We're Singapore's first benefit corporation fund manager. We have a purpose that capital allocators and capital owners should be brought together for a better world. And after today, we might have to put in a collective better world into our purpose. Over the last 35 years, I've been interviewing CEOs and board members. And it's only in the last 5 years that I've actually started asking the question that we have today with the panel here today, which is, can existential challenges be profitable? I think in the history of mankind, this is most probably the first time that humanity, is actually admitting that some of our challenges are our own doing, and also that we have to solve them ourselves as well. So I'm very happy to be sort of sitting here with a very esteemed panel. Let me do some quick introductions, and I won't be doing justice, but let me have a go. Starting at the extreme right here, we have Peng, who has been renowned for doing great work in the public sector and also for arts, amongst many other things, and has leadership roles with EDB, STB, and has been with Shell since 2012, and currently is the chairperson. Welcome.
Thank you.
We also have Khiang. Most people here would know him because he's had an illustrious career with our armed forces, has been with the Chief of Defense, as the Chief of Defense Forces as well. He moved his energies from that to SIA, and since 2011 has been with the IGE Group and also with the April Group, the bigger pulp and plantation companies in ASEAN as well. Welcome.
Thank you.
And someone who's bringing our average age down here, Edward Booty. He's someone who's had experience in health systems in 3 continents and 12 countries, worked both in public and private sector, and has a passion and has created Reach 52, health fintech, which is aimed at actually providing access to health for the 52% of the population that actually don't have that. So welcome, Edward. So for the audience, what I would like to start with is having a 1-minute elevator pitch from each one of you on what is the existential challenge that you and your firm is trying to address, and why has it become that? Let's leave the how you're doing it later. So Peng, if I may give you the first.
Sure. Thank you, Munib. Well, Shell is an energy company, full stop. So for us, the challenge, and I dare say it is an opportunity that we face today, is energy transition. We started working on it several years ago, even before it became rather, the theme of the moment. But it is all about energy transition and how we transform as an energy company for a cleaner and better future.
Great.
Well, RGE grows trees to produce products that are biodegradable, renewable. So obviously, climate change, which causes extremities in weathers, can have an impact in terms of tree growth, and therefore business continuity can be threatened. We also operate in rural areas, and income equality is increasing, particularly with inflation. And that can threaten our business because in the rural areas, we are probably more visible as the only company around. And therefore, these are threats to our business. Of course, pandemics, which causes supply chain issues, is also another threat to us. Yeah.
Great.
Sure, and yeah, lastly for me, firstly, 52% of the world can't access healthcare. As our name suggests, that's 3.7 billion people. But linking almost to the spirit of this panel, can healthcare be profitable? The COVID-19 pandemic created a new healthcare billionaire every 30 hours. So, there's incredible wealth in healthcare, but it's not decentralized. For us specifically, focusing on access to health in emerging markets, 70% of healthcare spending is out of pocket from private sector, limited government resources. So we're very much about enabling private sector integration that we'll talk about later, but also reflecting that no one company can do it alone. So companies have to be more social, but doing it alone is always going to be a failing, endeavor, basically. And I think the last existential challenge, that I'm really thinking about a lot at the moment, almost a daily email in my inbox, nowadays, is the link between climate and health. You can't move for it now with big donors, big funders. By 2030, 100 million people a year will die from climate-related tragedy, and 90% of them will be in low-income countries. That's everything from vector-borne diseases through to mental health issues, through to floods or whatever it might be. But yeah, the sort of link between low health access, the role of private sector, the need for collaboration, and really some of the shifting, climate, geopolitical tensions and how that plays out in terms of low-income people is very important.
Great. So we have some issues here that we're going to go deeper and diving into this to solve these, hopefully, with some profit at the end as well. Motivation. Let's start there, right? Because we saw Frank Mars talk about, and he finished off, and let's start there. He talked about motivation for companies should be that they might not be in existence if they don't change or come up with solutions. So let's start with the two existing, let's say, industries in transition. And this is let's put the elephant in the room here. These are two industries that have challenges and they're being addressed now. Maybe, Peng, can we start with you? What is the motivation? What has been the motivation for, let's say, a pivot by leadership? If you can just walk us through with examples.
Well, I started by saying that Shell is an energy company, and we've been around for a very long time, right? Look at our history here in Singapore. We've been here 131 years. I feel a great sense of pride every time I say that, because Singapore didn't exist 131 years ago. But we came to this part of the world, we saw the potential, we saw the need for energy, and we figured out, hey, there must be a way to profitably serve the energy needs of the East. And that was back, 131 years ago, when the simple idea was just to bring oil in massive vessels, take it to this part of the world, put it in a tank somewhere, and for Shell, that happened to be the island of Bukom, which we still operate from. Break it into bulk, because that was, you break bulk, and put it into smaller tins and serve the market, because that was what the market needed at that point in time. And if you think about the fact that, in that last 100+ years, we've actually seen energy transition happen before. It drove a lot of the growth, the economic growth in many parts of the world, industrialization and so on. So we worked through all of that. And here we are now at another point, where we have to think about how to drive it forward, but in a much cleaner way, in a way that recognizes that climate change is real. It has all kinds of consequences because of our own patterns of how we've chosen to grow, to live, and to behave, and to consume, and so on and so forth. So I think the first point is really that, for us, we've been in that game of building an energy ecosystem, being very much a part of it for a very long time. So, for us to be thinking constantly of how is this energy system going to change? What are countries, consumers, our customers going to look for in the decades to come? What are driving their concerns today is really part and parcel of how we do business. So, when I said earlier that several years ago, well before it became that fashionable, to talk about climate change the way we talk about it today, that for Shell actually started several years ago. Now, obviously, if I then take it to maybe a Singapore level so that I can bring in some examples, we were already thinking, look, on Bukom we operate Shell's, or we used to operate, and that's really the correct way to describe that now, we used to operate Shell's single largest refinery in the world, in our entire system. Pulau Bukom had the largest refinery. We were proud of that. And by the way, we were also proud of the fact that that was Singapore's first refinery back in the early 1960s. So if you ask any Shell staff in Singapore, they will say, whoa, sense of pride, right? We helped to build the country's first refinery. The early decisions that hit us when we were thinking not just about the future of what would be needed in the energy system, but also the competitive lens that we saw in Asia at that point in time. and thinking about what we needed to do, we had to make very painful decisions. And that painful decision was we're going to cut the size of our refinery here in terms of crude capacity by half. That's painful because, to say that we're going to do it before the market would tell us that we had to do it, it is painful. And the carbon impact of that is about 1.5 million tons, give or take, right? And it's therefore substantial. So, as we were thinking about the energy transition, therefore, the point is we have to take decisions, painful or otherwise. Those early decisions, and we announced that 2 years ago, are painful because there are jobs at stake. And with jobs disappearing, it means what else are you going to do there? How else are you going to remake it so that you can serve and continue to serve the needs of our customers going forward? So, another example. Back in 2019, we were the first company here to put an EV charging point at one of our retail network. When we did that, and we, announced it, we had a little bit of a ceremony to say, hey, here's the first charging point for EVs at a retail station. I had people texting me saying, wow, you guys are going to stop selling fuel and you're going to do EV charging. Wonderful. But at that point in time, out of 1 million cars in Singapore, there was only 1,000, just about 1,000 EVs. So imagine the size of the market, which, was suggesting that, look, why would we do it? Well, we felt we had to do it because we had to start learning. We had to start figuring out how to change, understand the local environment, understand what it will take if we had to do not just one, but over time, hundreds and thousands, and we're very glad. I was just talking to Alan at breakfast this morning, that Shell will be one of the few companies that will build up to 4,000 or 5,000 new charge points at HDB estates, because, we've been successful in putting together a proposition that will work for Singapore with the kind of high-density housing that we see, right? So it is taking the hard decisions. It is having to learn along the way that is driving what we do today.
And we will get to the how you're doing it a bit more detailed.
Absolutely.
So Khiang, if you can just share with us again the motivation for why RGE and April have been transforming themselves, at least in the last decade.
For one, it comes from a family values. The approach for doing business, for all the business group, the purpose of all the business group, according to them, is to improve lives by managing resource sustainably. And all the business have to operate on the basis of 5C principle. You have to do good for community, country, climate, customer, then it'll be good for the company. And we have operationalized that in all our businesses. So that is the internal motivation. The external motivation comes from external partners. In 2013, in the effort to be more transparent, we formed a stakeholder advisory committee, which comprised experts in forestry, government, businesses, and so on and so forth. And the role of the stakeholder advisory committee is really to make sure the business do what we say we will do in terms of our sustainability commitment. And in the discussion and collaboration with them, they push us, towards better practices. For instance, in 2015, we took the decision to stop animal conversion, which we had plans to do until 2019. But through discussion with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee, they challenged us to it, and we decided to go ahead. And on top of that, our partners, WWF, in that committee challenged us to say, okay, how about doing a 1-to-1, which means for every hectare of plantation, we have 1 hectare of conservation area. And we took on that challenge, and over the time, we bought 4 pieces of production areas right in the heart of Kampar Peninsula that are surrounded by our plantations, to protect it, and convert it to conservation licenses. Today, we are not near 1-to-1, we are only 0.83, but we are in discussion to get to 1-to-1. And hopefully, Even better than that, to be nature positive. So these are the two key drivers that move us, towards better practices in this area.
Great. So it seems like existing industries like to learn, want to change, want to move, because they have existing businesses that have to be improved upon and have to be sustained. But Ed, your motivation for change, for bringing something new in, you worked in government, you worked with organizations. Do you think that you could not have achieved what you want to achieve working in an existing organization, and therefore you needed to start something new?
Yeah, sure. So just a quick, firstly, one line about what we do for the benefit of the audience, perhaps. So yeah, we work in 6 countries. We connect more rural areas to healthcare. So we work with pharmacies and small shops, as well as government health workers, to sort of connect them to healthcare, run targeted health campaigns, so vaccine campaigns, promoting diabetes screening or whatever, and enabling the supply of products. So we're opening new markets, and big businesses often fund these campaigns. So Big Pharma, Unilever, Consumer Health, work with us to, do some social good and sell products in more rural areas, basically, starting in the Philippines, but now India, Indonesia, and Kenya and South Africa are our big markets as well. In terms of my background, Big Pharma used to do access to medicine, specifically in India, so trying to do discounted, lower margin products to reach more rural Indian customers. And it was just very apparent that one company can't do this alone, training health workers, getting the permits, doing screenings, all this, cost of building a functioning health service, to then sell lower margin products with harder supply chain, a less educated consumer base, just wasn't working. So this is kind of where the idea came from, to give the industry a platform to collaborate and do access. After this, I was in UK Department of Health, digital strategy work, mainly around non-communicable disease models. And there it was all about getting people out of hospitals, management in the home, management in the community. And that's where the concept of Reach 52 was born. Digital first, community-based healthcare, not coming to hospitals. Even in Singapore, people are trying to get out of hospitals now, managed in the home, but then also allow private sector to contribute and collaborate. In terms of why doing this alone, just saw huge market opportunity, really saw the need for a leapfrog. I was in consulting and the UK Health Service before, clearly, old models of care. So I just felt, there was just a need for an innovative, new platform that couldn't be served by an existing, vendor or agency.
So too much inertia and, let's say, gridlock in the bureaucracy on one side and too much profit and greed on the other side. And you wanted to be somewhere in between.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we'll probably come on to this later, but exactly that. So too much inertia, too much profit making, and really enjoyed some of the slides earlier about the window dressers. This is one of my pet peeves. I felt that I was in a window dressing company, talk the talk, but don't walk the walk, and just weren't committing to the mission and values, and therefore wanted to build a platform that could really do what we say we want to do. That's why we're called Reach 52. It's our mission, it's our problem statement, all in one. And that still frustrates me to this day. I do often joke that some of our big pharmaceutical partners have a KPI to talk about doing access to healthcare, but also do nothing, Endless conversations. We refuse to engage some companies now because it's such a window dressing exercise of all talk and low action that, I just wanted to have a doing, proactive organization, basically.
So it seems like if you don't want to lose, let's say, motivated individuals from your company, such as Ed, we've got to change as well. We've got to address these existential, and that's another motivation. But let's move from motivation to something that even, again, our previous speakers talked about, and that is values. We saw Frank Mars talk about how over the decades, for many years, they've been changing or reviewing their values. Again, for the two industries that are in transition, I'd be curious to see how much of value changing has needed to be done internally or at all for let's say, helping your firm to evolve.
Well, at Shell, our core values, right? Integrity, respect, care, that's fundamental. That's our DNA. And it has not changed because of energy transition. But having said that, given the urgency to not just work on energy transition, but to take decisions, to demonstrate that, there are different pathways, but there are pathways to get there, will require us to also then clarify for our organization the types of behaviors we need to build in our organization that will help us to succeed. So we talk about several, and I'll just give a couple of examples. One is the whole idea behind transparency and an open-mindedness, to ideas and to change. Transparency because we want to be held accountable, we will be held accountable, and transparency will help us in that journey. So we publish, regularly sustainability reports, and we also now have an energy transition report. We put our plans to a shareholder vote. We've done it twice already. So, and we even publish country by country the amount of taxes that we pay. What we call our tax transparency report. So transparency is I believe, vital, to an end. And that end is to build trust. Because we know that, energy transition has no simple answers. There will be many pathways. There will be a need to figure out what works in a particular location, country, region, in a way that might not work in different parts of the world. So, there is a huge need to even localize our thinking. And how are you going to get there if you don't have trust with the stakeholders that you need to work with? And those stakeholders are not just customers that we do business with, but it is communities that we are part of, governments, regulators, who are also thinking about the same thing. Don't forget, it is countries that are making commitments to the Paris Accord to cut. Corporates will have to do our part, but governments also have to demonstrate that they're going to get there. So I think, transparency helps to build trust, and trust is vital in how we deal with the stakeholders that are necessary to what we do. So I would say several things that we make clear is not just transparency, it's trust building, and then finally, collaboration. How do we collaborate? I think, most of the time we hear things like, well, let's have a win-win. I totally agree. But in some cases, and we are already seeing it, collaboration means also bringing even the people in our own sector together, people that you would traditionally have been thinking of as competitors, because there is a space which requires us to come together and say, all right, let's find a way to solve this together, Because at the current moment, we can't do it by ourselves. A good example is carbon capture. Today, there are very few projects, in fact, none that I can really truly think of, a carbon project, a carbon capture and sequestration project that can work without strong government support. We know that because of the way that, the technology is, how you deal with shipping, how you deal with storage, how you make it commercially viable. And in many cases, we've had to bring our own industry together to collaborate. So I think collaboration will have to be expanded in the way we think about it and in the way we make it happen.
I mean, you said values don't change. Do the priorities change?
Well, look, I said values don't change because those values of care, respect, integrity, that's absolutely still core to Shell. But the behaviors that we're asking our people to now deeply think about and consider, because it matters to how we succeed in energy transition, are all of those things that we've kind of laid on as important. And if I can add a fourth one, it is that constant hunger and ability to keep learning. What we in Shell will call learner's mindset, meaning everybody not only can learn, but must learn.
Sure.
Yeah.
So Khiang, values.
Our values don't change. The issue for us is how do we cascade and embed these values, the principle of the purpose, the 5 C's, and even our core values down to the ground. Because for us, sustainability is not only about commitments. It's about impact, actual execution on the ground to achieve impact. So when, in 2015, when the SDG came out and the Paris Climate Agreement came out, we took the opportunity to gather our senior executives and people together, starting off with in April group, and try and look at it and see how we embed these global goals that are out there, these global concerns, into the way we do business. And broadly, we came up with 4 trusts, right? And these are people that are gathered in the group are senior management, different levels of management, the gender diversity and age diversity as well. And we came upon 4 trusts. One is decarbonization, nature solutions, community issues, as well as secularity. And within these 4 trusts, we then broke them into separate work groups that are quite aligned to the way their daily jobs, and asked them to look at what are the goals. And of course, senior management set very ambitious goals, and they will do some low-balling, so to speak, because they know they are going to be embedded into their annual KPIs, right? Performance, because until and unless it hits a pocket, people don't take it seriously. So they work through, and through the push-pull tension, we came upon all the commitments, 18 of them in each of these pillars, right? And the UN SDG also provides us a framework for us to work on, particularly with community needs, because I talk about doing good for the community. What does it mean by good? Does it mean that we think it's good for them, or does it mean that they really need it? But the UN data provided us, for example, in Indonesia, stunting rate is a big problem. 1 in 4 kids are stunted, meaning in the early childhood, their development is stunted, and that affects their whole life in terms even the cognitive ability as well as their health issues. We came to know that and said, okay, now we must do something. And we added that into one of the commitments and KPI, that is to reduce stunting by 50% in all the villages, about 207 of them, in and around our area of operations. So by this way, we sensitize our employees throughout the structure, to the needs of the people out there, to the climate issues, and come into the landing on what they have to do for the next 10 years. And that's how we came up with a 2030 plan. Why do we say 2030? Because a lot of companies talk about 2050. But 2050, we said a lot of us are not going to be around. So we need some line of sight, some accountability, and therefore 2030 is a more realistic, feasible target, that will hold the existing executives accountable for it, so to speak. So that way, we then put them into the KPIs, and they all know what they have to do and deliver, and that has been our 2030 plan for April, which we now cascaded to all the other businesses. And I must say it has been a fascinating experience, embedding these values, this approach, and all the employees are excited about it. And it has become, in a sense, our employee value proposition to hire and retain the people as well. So that's how we have been able to evolve the values.
It's interesting. One of the things that's coming clear from the conversations we had earlier on, the presentation by Jaime as well, is that values don't necessarily change. What seems to be changing is the language and the collaboration and talking with all the stakeholders. That seems to be the one common thread, that the more you bring in all stakeholders into your value system, yes, when you're working, that seems to be what's happening. So we've dealt with what is the existential challenge. We've dealt with how it's come about. I suppose now the question is, how are you delivering on a solution for it, and profitably? Because at the end of the day, the question is, can addressing existential challenges be profitable? So maybe if you can, we'll start with Ed this time. Can you give us an example within your organization where you are addressing one of the challenges, not maybe the challenge, and it is profitable?
Yeah, of course. Well, firstly, starting at a sort of macro level, I was thinking about that question and this panel. I think case in point is Pfizer and the COVID vaccine. Can addressing an existential challenge be profitable? Pfizer has doubled their sales and more as a result of creating, the vaccines. So clearly, yes, in the right market circumstances, if there's demand, if there's a market, worth going after. I think for us, when I think about it, as I say, our job, I think now is a platform. We connect rural areas, invest a bit in the system, improve government relations in the process, improve your brand, and we will sell your products. In terms of the sort of impact of that, I actually bought some products. I thought it might be good. We're working with like Unilever on launching stuff like this. It's just like powdered hand soap, new product. They normally have to ship bottles of soap. This is low cost, it's cheap, it's available. Unilever's paying us to run these sort of awareness and screening campaigns. About 50% of people go on to buy this product. While we're doing that, we're promoting COVID vaccines as well. So wash your hands, COVID's not gone away, get vaccinated, get your booster, and here's a voucher for some discounted hand soap that's cheaper, better, affordable than before. 50% conversion, which is pretty high, by marketing standards. So yeah, I think the short answer is yes, it can be profitable at a sort of very macro level, at a very micro level, and I certainly see our role at Reach 52 is just providing that simple, dare I say it, platform to achieve these kind of hybrid missions.
Sure.
You work with us, we've got the data, we'll do the campaigns, we'll bulk buy your products, and it's simple, it doesn't take away from management time. I think to your point about KPIs as well, that's probably one of the hardest things we face in Reach 52. The amount of times I show general managers in, say, Indonesia, the company's own website about their social goals. So you're saying you want to reach 300 million people or do this by 2030. It's not in their KPIs. So a lot of the time, their efforts will be going on selling to hospitals, selling to big pharmacy chains in your traditional business. So I really think what we're trying to do is just give that platform to make it simple, given that very much, a lot of the time, these goals don't filter down and they can't, spare the headspace for it almost.
Sure. So, Khiang?
Well, just perhaps 3 examples. One, of course, decarbonization plan involves a lot of reduction of excessive use of energy. And that, we did it through our continuous improvement projects, and that leads to lowering of cost of production. So it helps in the bottom line. Number 2, when we made the commitment of no more conversion of forest to plantations, we focus a lot on improving silvicultural practices on existing land to improve yields. And through the last 5 years, we have improved yields by 25%. That increases the revenue as well as reduces the cost at the bottom, and therefore increased profit. The last perhaps is FFV, Fire Free Village Program. In this instance, I talk about the cost of doing versus the cost of not doing. In 2013, we had the first episode of Fire and Haze since I joined RG in 2011. And we started looking at these issues, right? Our approach so far has been defensive, suppression. And we took a look at the preventive approach and see what can we do to prevent it. And we came to the conclusion that for every dollar I was spent on prevention, actually, I will save about $5 from suppression. Let me elaborate. So we started a program, 3 villages in 2013, went to the village, appointed a fire chief, pay him salary on our own accord. He's to educate the people on the ground, the hazards of fires. We bought air quality monitoring instruments to put in the village. And of course, ultimately, it is providing a mechanical means as an alternative for them to clear land, because for them, the cheapest, quickest way is match. But by providing a mechanical means, they have no other excuse. Lastly, we incentivize them that at the end of dry season, if they have 0 fire, we'll give them $10,000 US worth of projects. We do not give them money, we go there and do projects for them, whether it's to build mosques, roads, and so on and so forth. And we expanded the program to the extent that in 2015, the worst El Nino season in the history of Indonesia, and we had a big haze episode, our areas were hardly any fires. And over the years, it's very clear that as our acreage, hectareage of number of villages increases, the fire burned hectareage has gone down quite a bit. And we found that for every dollar we spend we could save on suppression, because suppression means hiring helicopters, renting big helicopters, which are, every time you fly is easily $3,000 per hour. I know that because that's my past life. And it costs a lot. And the worst is that, in haze, you can't fly because there's no visibility. So it's not a very cost-effective solution. So that way, by doing this preventive approach, we actually save a lot of money, and therefore adds to the profitability. And plus, I will tell you, this is a more permanent mindset change. A suppression will not cause a mindset change in the villagers. By working with them, it is a permanent mindset change. And that means our long-term future looks much brighter, not only for the community, but for us as a company as well.
Great. Peng, I'm going to ask a question, audience question from you, actually.
Go for it.
So there's a question from the audience that's, must addressing existential challenges be always profitable?
Absolutely. For us, we have said that we will transition profitably. So it's a given. There is no kind of trying to wiggle your way out of it and say, well, why don't we just keep doing our existing business and kind of park this on the side? So we have said very clearly that we will transition profitably, and that's a message that we cascade throughout the organization. Obviously, it's kind of down to the how, right? For us, because we serve so many different sectors, we have to look at how sector by sector, energy requirements, energy usage will have to change, we'll have to modify. What does future fuels look like? What does new fuels look like? How are you going to recast the supply chains to make all of that happen and to deliver it? So, I think it is down to the how and how you work it sector by sector. In our take, so I think Khiang gave some really great examples of how even simple things, energy efficiency has not run its course. We know today that many of the projects that we do at our sites, for example, in sectors like marine, energy efficiency can still give you 15, maybe even 20, 25% improvement if you do those things well and if you focus on delivering that. But at the same time, you've got to also push the boundary, right? I'll give you an example. In aviation, we talk a lot about sustainable aviation fuel. So this is fuel that doesn't start from crude oil. It's fuel that starts from renewable, sustainable sources like waste, like biomass, depending on the generations of technology that you use. And today, actually the supply of sustainable aviation fuel is minuscule compared to the demand for jet fuel globally. Less than 5% of what we produce today is considered sustainable aviation fuel. But how do you figure out a way to say who is willing to pay the premium that's necessary for sustainable aviation fuel today in order to give enough of a demand signal for people like us to start investing, because these investments are massive, and they have to be done over a long period of time. And you can't expect every government to mandate it. In some parts of the world, they mandate it. They provide you a clear demand signal. You can invest with that in mind. In other parts of the world, Asia is a good example, you don't have that type of environment. So how do you do it? So we've created a venture with a few other partners to use blockchain as a technology in a book and claim system to figure out where the demand signals are, how they can be aggregated so that it can provide us enough of a signal to decide where we want to invest. It's called Avelia. If you're interested, go take a look at it. But it's about pushing our own people to keep thinking of new ideas to enable us to invest profitably and transition profitably.
Great, thanks. And I think with that, we've got 52 seconds left. To finish off, this has been very interesting. As the minister said early on, in good times, it's easy to be good. But he also told us that times are going to get challenging, and therefore all of us need to start thinking of how to address existential challenges profitably. And for that, we almost have to change our mindset from being accountable to responsible. And I think that's a very important learning as well, that if we take things in a responsible way and address them in a responsible way, then we can address a lot of the existential challenges profitably, maybe less profitably than we would normally, but still profitably. But with that, I want to thank our esteemed panel here. Please give them all a hand of applause.